All right, everyone. So we will meet back up again right now. We'll have each secretary or note taker of each group give us a few highlight points of your discussions. We do only have 15 minutes, and we do have people who have to go back to Fiesta Americana on the bus, so we just want to be mindful. We can go a few minutes over, but we don't want to take everyone's time. So yeah, we'll just do the summaries and let you all off for dinner. Does any group want to volunteer first? In Espanol. Do you guys catch that? No. See? Oh, you're not ready? Okay, perfect. Okay, we'll let you guys go next. All right. Which group would like to volunteer first? Okay.
Okay, here we go. But I'm going to call on my group probably to help fill in the gaps. Okay, so yeah, lots of good conversation. No quick and easy bullet points, but done my best. So yeah, maybe I just want to, I think we started with really lifting up how powerful it was to see the direct quotes from the folks being interviewed. Oh, sorry, hello, there we go. So we talked about just how powerful it was to see the direct quotes from folks who were interviewed. And again, just really valuing kind of translated data and of the experiences of Indigenous-led groups in relationship with donors. And then we got into a conversation about, how we hope that this data can help us better understand the impacts of where the funding is going. Maybe some data on understanding, funding that is causing harm, funding, and kind of some where some funding is going upstream and getting at root causes. We talked about, again, data and just like that, and knowledges of understanding, cultural preservation and the relationship to the issues that were listed in that, like homelessness, education, environmental harm. So kind of really, really uplifting that cultural preservation connection. And then there was some discussion on how the data could maybe be like presented, with visual data, some audio visual ideas, QR codes to YouTube videos, or I don't know, all the things. But just some conversation there. And then we got into again though, just like a desire for this report to be able to speak to the heart of the problem. The issue, why is there such a gap in funding Indigenous peoples initiatives and groups and organizations? So this idea of how do we name the heart of the problem? Are there other ways, other data speak to things like bias, the structural issues that can cause cause harm, I guess. And then we did talk about as well, like naming, where there might be like the interfacing of having non-Indigenous people advocating or like in relationship with donors, and where that is necessary in some cases and can be helpful, but then also where that might be something worth naming as a way of getting curious about why this root, why there is this kind of ongoing issue with essentially racism in the donor world. Then we talked about how case studies could be helpful to uplift funding that has been well received, funding that wasn't well received, and again, maybe with quotes from the groups themselves and the donors, and again, maybe calling in a bit of a conversation of seeing shared humanity and starting to build trust again, or starting to be able to see multiple perspectives on the issues here. And then we got into how some sound bites on impacts, gaps in funding, some compelling statistics that can help, again, bring donors along, support that donor education and understanding that like funding Indigenous peoples and Indigenous peoples work and cultural revitalization is necessary for the well-being of all of us who want to call this planet home. So, again, being able to lift that up. And then, but Then we got into how we really hope that this data can be something that is exciting for Indigenous folks to read and relate to, and that it's that it can lend itself to advocacy for more grants that are multi-year, that are available for general support. And acknowledging a lot of the invisibilized or the unfunded labor that goes in from Indigenous groups to participate not only in like donor relationships, but the grant writing, but other elements of like supporting the organization as well. Am I missing anything? Woo. Got a great group here, some brilliant people.
That was awesome. Thank you so much, Group 1. That was so much great insight, and I absolutely can already see ways for that to be put into the report. So thank you so much. This is so helpful. Who's Group 2? Who would like to be the next? Okay.
I can do it in English. It's okay. Well, discussion in this group was also very rich, very diverse. I will try to highlight some notes, and please all the members of the group can expand. There is one very interesting issue that Romina bring to the table, well, to the grass, which was about the main recommendation about the very nature, the very colonial foundations of philanthropy. I think it was expressed in that way. And she encouraged us also to be a bit more intersectional when delving into that self-critic line of reflection, to also recognize the capitalist and also the patriarchal foundations of philanthropy, and which is more important, I guess, that it would be great to delve into the current practices and contradictions that keep some funders tied to those foundations, and even in some cases at the service of those oppressing interests. That is a very interesting line that was discussed in the beginning. Then we went to a very interesting discussion regarding the financial landscape itself, that saying that, for example, expanding into trying to improve understanding on the relationships between not only philanthropic financials, but also bilaterals, solidarity-based, and other ways of funding, and even, for example, rural microfinance I mentioned, that will allow to understand in a more realistic way how solutions look like, how evolution of funding and grant making look like for many stakeholders around the world, not necessarily north-based, but at country or regional basis. So there's a lot of discussion on that, and we think that it could be easily an area of expansion for the report. Then we enter into a very interesting discussion that Claudia started, asking why we see different levels of flexibility, or on the other side, rigidness from funders, given the same type of funding or sector. And we discuss in the different factors that could determine those different levels, from legal barriers to organizational cultures to the very political origin and position of specific funders. So we see that delving into those factors also could help a lot. Other things, for example, Edwin from Guatemala mentioned their own practices at the American Jewish World Service in the way of approaching both to relationships in terms of gradually building trust with organizations keeping all the time at the center the visions and on the other hand, particular regulatory obligations that some organizations, in that case, public foundation, I guess, have, which are different in terms of, for example, how to approach to some political activity or others. So I think I will end saying that Jennifer mentioned that the study could, or the report could also delve in how grant making can evolve in a more effective way, and some of the channels to improve, for example, dialogue among stakeholders, to make grant making and funding in general to evolve. A last comment, Romina also mentioned that the tax regulatory frameworks at different countries put organization in a very difficult condition, situation, even when they have not very tough requirements from funders. So the relationship between regulations beyond the philanthropic financials and that funding is also important. And finally, Victor mentioned that the need of doing the whole language of philanthropy and funding more inclusive, more simple, more adapted to communities' realities and demands, and having accessibility as a major principle to respect. I will stop here, and please, any member of the group.
Awesome. Okay, gracias. Who's the next volunteer? Right here. Okay.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. So I'll just try to, I'm going to do this in a bit of a scattershot way and just share a few points. One thing we discussed was what are to better understand what are the funding ranges in different regions in US, Central America, Africa, Asia, that there aren't that there aren't a lot of indigenous folks from Africa here at this meeting, and it can be difficult when states don't recognize indigenous groups. How would you seek out that information? Another point was if you fail at something, you can no longer access the funding. So, what does funding look like if you fail and you're learning something that moves the work forward? Another point is what are examples of, another point was some of the contradictions in the system. So you could be a re-grantor accepting videos or accepting a phone call or short narratives, but then you have to report to somebody else and produce these financial statements and these audits. So what are the contradictions, and how do you sort of deal with a re-grantor who's then dealing with these colonial systems? Somebody else asked if should we only be funding Indigenous-led funders? Should we be funding an Indigenous-led alliance? Let's see. Another point that was raised was, how do you deal with state funding that is undoing the work that you're trying to do if you're in a state that is using millions of dollars of taxpayers' income to do more harm or to sue another state. So the example was that tax dollars are being used to sue Minnesota so that they have to use more coal energy. So what governments have found strategies to change the way that they do things? Let's see. Another point that was raised was, as for Indigenous women who are trying to do work on rights, if you are seeking funding to help empower women, but you're being told that you can only use the funding to hire a lawyer, that's not helping you actually deal with the issue in the community. Another point was, so we again talked about how the land grabs are continuing in different regions of the world. Oh, sorry. Is that better? Oh, hold it really close. Okay. Okay, that's a lot louder. Um, how do you find climate funding and food and agri? One person was saying like what percentage of unrestricted funding is available? How do you define climate funding if it touches everything? And what does it mean to do holistic funding? And one of the last points was how would this tool be used? So can this report be used by people who are applying for the funding as well? And could the report be, how could funders take the report to give support to people who are applying for funding? So yes, okay.
So I think a lot of what's been said already was probably covered, so feel free to add if I don't say anything. But actually, following on really nicely from Mina's last point, can you hear me? Sorry, oh, that's better. I thought I was talking loud. Following on from Mina's point just then, I think that we had a lot of agreement in the group. This will be really useful for Indigenous groups to be able to access, to know who are the funders that allow groups to apply and report in their own languages, in their own time, in their own way. So more opportunities for autonomy versus dependency, and kind of which are the funders that are moving away from project cycle funding towards relationships, commitment, and a process. And then the other question was, how does equity play out in this space? So understanding some of the data on that. And also understanding which Indigenous funds are doing these things really well and how we can learn from those Indigenous funds. I'll pass you my notes as well in case there's anything I missed. And then on the second question, what I think one of the main things that came out was really understanding how to build good relationships. So not that aren't just about the reporting. So again, which funders are doing this well? Can we kind of build on that? And also actions. So what are the sort of next steps in terms of the learning journey that comes from this? And there was a suggestion about having like long-term, carrying on the dialogues and making sure we're keeping check on how are these things being implemented that were recommended in the report. And I think everything else has been covered. Did I miss anything?
Okay, so our group was talking about the dispelling the methodologies by funders that we need to shift that way of thinking. Can you guys hear me? And that funders need more capacity building. That we saw a lack of that, and we also saw a lack of imagination on the funders level. And then we also want to see like what is working out there. What are the best practices? We want to see the actual work that is working, and then like the case studies. What's the result of the case studies? And then at what point does the transformation take place? And what led to the moment of transition and transformation?
Something else that came up, we had like smaller group discussions, and we're talking about how, like, understanding for funders, what are some of the challenges, sometimes even having to bring in grant making operations team and not just the programs team, like understanding, for example, like tax compliances. And then something else that came up like in our side discussion was like for Indigenous-led groups, for example, like application proposal writing, for some Indigenous-led groups, it's more verbal, like it's a verbal approach, but for funders, it's like always written. So like in cases like that, what's the responsibility of the funder? Could he be finding a consultant for the group? What does that look like? Of course, in different cases, it's not the same approach that will apply for all groups and all funders. And then another thing that came up kind of touches on what was shared was having an intersection on racial justice. Disability justice was raised, but understanding that Afro-Indigenous women experience multiple marginalization with multiple identities. And even though the research kind of mentioned, like in Africa and Asia, it's different, but just like having that lens. And then the last thing, which also touches on some of things that was shared, was on trends. The data is focused on like 2016 to 2019, and from 2020 to now, so many things have happened and have changed. Some funders are probably going back to pre-2019 ways. Some funders are like finding new ways of doing things, changing things. So like, what are the trends that are happening now? It doesn't necessarily have to be a full report, but just like having those trends, yeah.
Miigwech, gracias. Thank you, everyone. And just to that point that you mentioned, we really are looking forward to diving into the interviews and the survey data, and that's really going to help us get that bigger 2020 to 2022 picture. But yeah, that's definitely that's needed. So thank you for really making sure that's represented. So thank you, everyone. That's it? Wow, what a great crew. This has been such a pleasure. I was saying to Saber, we mostly work virtually and we mostly work on opposite ends of, the country, and some of our team members are global as well. So it's nice to be with everyone in person and having dialogue amongst each other. I think we're really getting a clear vision of how to make this report useful for you and, how to get this message out there. So, Chimigwech, gracias, thank you for all coming here. This has been such a pleasure. Gracias a todos. And survey, right. So we also, Saver passed around a survey, QR code. So if you want to add your voice more or send it to people you think would be interested, feel free to share the survey or complete it yourself. It should only take about 15 minutes. Sure. Sorry? It says it's reached its scan limit. Okay. We are having some technical issues with the QR code, but keep the piece of paper and we'll try and figure it out on our end. If we have to get a new QR code, you'll see us around. We'll be here all week, so we'll get you the survey. Okay.